Hello, it's Dispeller. I'm here with the Boundaries book. I forgot to take my thumbnail picture for this. Darn it. I wonder if I can edit and take a thumbnail. Hold on a minute. See if it'll let me do it. Customization. I don't think it will. Oh well. So this one won't have a thumbnail of a Boundaries book. That's okay. So we are on myth number 5. We are in chapter 6 about the common boundary myths. So myth number 5, boundaries mean that I'm angry. Brenda had finally mustered up the courage to tell her boss she was no longer going to work weekends for no pay. She had asked for a meeting, which had gone well. Her boss had been understanding, and the situation was being ironed out. Everything had gone well, except inside Brenda. It had begun innocently enough. Brenda had itemized her issues with the work situation and had presented her view and suggestions. But midway through her presentation, she'd been surprised by a sense of rage welling up inside. Her feeling of anger and injustice had been difficult to keep hidden. It had even slipped out in a couple of sarcastic comments about the boss's golfing Fridays, comments that Brenda had had no intention of making. Sitting at her desk, Brenda felt confused. Where had the anger come from? Was she that kind of person? Maybe the culprit was these boundaries she'd been setting. It's no secret that quite often when people begin telling the truth, setting limits, and taking responsibility, an angry cloud follows them around for a while. They become touchy and easily offended, and they discover a hair-trigger temper that frightens them. Friends will make comments like, "You're not the nice, loving person I used to know." The guilt and shame caused by these remarks can further confuse new boundary setters. I remember when I went to college, when I was in my first marriage, and when I would come home, my ex-husband would say, "The worst thing you ever did was go to college," because I began not putting up with his abuse anymore. I began speaking up and saying, "You're not going to treat me that way anymore. You're not going to scream in my face. You're not going to put me down in front of the kids. And if you do, I'm just going to walk away. I'm not going to put up with it." And he hated that I went back to college because it was teaching me that I was not a doormat and I had a right to be valued and treated with respect, you know? So yeah, I can relate to that. So do boundaries cause anger in us? Absolutely not. This myth is a misunderstanding of emotions in general and anger specifically. Emotions or feelings have a function. They tell us something. They're a signal. Here are some of the things every time I read, I get this stuff that comes up in my throat. Here are some things that our negative emotions tell us. Fear tells us to move away from danger, to be careful. Sadness tells us we've lost something, a relationship, an opportunity, or an idea. Anger is also a signal. Like fear, anger signals danger. However, rather than urging us to withdraw, anger is a sign that we need to move forward to confront the threat. Jesus' rage at the defilement of the temple is an example of how this feeling functions. Anger tells us that our boundaries have been violated. Much like a nation's radar defense system, angry feelings serve as an early warning system, telling us we're in danger of being injured or controlled. I apologize for my voice. I don't know what's going on. That's why I'm reading now, because if I happen to lose my voice, I'm not going to be able to read for a while. So that's why I find myself hostile to pushy salesmen, Carl exclaimed. He couldn't understand why he had a hard time loving sales personnel who couldn't hear his no. They were attempting to get inside his financial boundaries, and Carl's anger was simply doing its job. Cool. I'm going to post that somewhere in one of these corners where I did that thing about manipulation by salespeople. I think that's a good video for you to go to next if you haven't seen it yet. Goes right along with this part of the book. Anger also provides us with a sense of power to solve a problem. It energizes us to protect ourselves, those we love, and our principles. In fact, a common Old Testament illustration of an angry person is someone with a hard-breathing nose. Imagine a bull in a ring, snorting and pawing, getting the steam up to attack, and you'll get the picture. However, as with all emotions, anger doesn't understand time. Anger doesn't dissipate automatically. If the danger occurred 2 minutes ago or 20 years ago, it has to be worked through appropriately. Otherwise, anger simply lives inside the heart. I'm live, babe, just in case you don't know. This is why individuals with injured boundaries often are shocked by the rage they feel inside when they begin setting limits. This is generally not new anger, it's old anger. It's often years of no's that were never voiced, never respected, never listened to. The protests against all the evil and violation of our souls sit inside us, waiting to tell their truths. The scriptures say that the earth quakes under a slave when he becomes king. The only difference between a slave and a king is that one has no choices and the other has all choices available to him. When you suddenly give those who have been imprisoned all their lives a great deal of power, the result is often an angry tyrant. Years of constant boundary violations generate great anger. It's very common for boundary injured people to do some catching up with anger. They may have a season of looking at boundary violations of the past that they never realized existed. Nathan's family was known in his small town as the ideal family. Other kids envied him growing up, saying, "You're lucky your parents are so close to you. Mine couldn't care less about me." Feeling a great deal of gratitude for his close family, Nathan never noticed that his family carefully controlled differences and separateness. No one ever really disagreed or fought over values or feelings. "I always thought conflict meant a loss of love," he would say. It wasn't until Nathan's marriage began suffering that he began questioning his past. He naively married a woman who manipulated and controlled him. Several years into the marriage, he knew it was in serious trouble. But to Nathan's surprise, he was not only angry at himself for getting into this mess, but also at his parents for not equipping him with tools for handling life better. Because he genuinely loved the warm family in which he was raised, Nathan felt guilty and disloyal when he remembered occasions in which his attempts to separate from his parents and set his own limits were constantly and lovingly frustrated. Mom would cry about his argumentativeness, Dad would tell Nathan not to upset his mom, and Nathan's boundaries remained immature and non-functional. The more clearly he saw what this had cost him, the angrier he felt. "I made my own choices in life," he said, "but life would have been a lot better had they helped me learn to say no to people." Did Nathan remain angry at his parents forever? No, and neither do you have to. As hostile feelings surface, bring them to relationship. Confess them. The Bible tells us to tell the truth to each other about our lacks so that we may be healed. James 5:16. Experience the grace of God through others who love you in your anger. This is a first step toward resolving past anger. A second step is to rebuild the injured part of your soul. Take responsibility for healing the treasures that may have been violated. In Nathan's case, his sense of personal autonomy and safety had been deeply wounded. He had to practice for a long time to regain this in his primary relationships, but the more he healed, the less anger he felt. Finally, as you develop a sense of biblical boundaries, you develop more safety in the present. You develop more confidence. You're less enslaved to the fear of other people. In Nathan's case, he set better limits with his wife and improved his marriage. As you develop better boundaries, you have less need for anger. This is because in many cases, anger was the only boundary you had. Once you have your no intact, you no longer need the rage signal. You can see evil coming your way and prevent it from harming you by your boundaries. Don't fear the rage you discover when you first begin your boundary development. It is the protest of earlier parts of your soul. Those parts need to be unveiled, understood, and loved by God and people. And then you need to take responsibility for healing them and developing better boundaries. I always told my clients when I was life coaching that it's not uncommon for you when you get out of a narcissistically abusive relationship to kind of go to one extreme, like you just don't trust anybody for a while, or you're angry at everybody for a while, because you almost have to go all the way up to the highest level. I don't mean go out and harm somebody, but, experience that fullness of the negative emotion before you can kind of start tapping into the positive and kind of eventually come to a balance. It's very, very common. Like when you come out of an addiction, for instance, it's very common to go into another addiction full force for a while. until you can realize that it's a pattern thing and get yourself to the point where you can establish that equilibrium, that even keel, that balance. It's very common to go to one extreme. It just is. So be patient with yourself, It's going to take time healing after broken relationships, after addictions, after whatever you're going through. Boundaries decrease anger. This brings us to an important point about anger. The more biblical our boundaries are, the less anger we experience. Individuals with mature boundaries are the least angry people in the world, while those who are just beginning boundary work see their anger increase. This passes as boundaries grow and develop. Why is this? Remember the early warning system function of anger? We feel it when we're violated. If you can prevent boundary violation in the first place, you don't need the anger. You're more in control of your life and values. Tina resented her husband's coming home 45 minutes late to dinner every night. She had a hard time keeping the food hot. The kids were hungry and crabby, and their evening study schedule was thrown off. Things changed, however, when she began serving dinner on time, with or without her husband. He came home to refrigerated leftovers that he had to reheat and eat alone. 3 or 4 sessions like this prompted Tina's husband to tear himself away from work earlier. Tina's boundary, eating with the kids on time, kept her from feeling violated and victimized. She got her needs met, the kids' needs met, and she didn't feel angry anymore. The old saying, don't get mad, just get even, isn't accurate. It's far better to say, don't get mad, set a limit. I don't even see how this ties in with what they said. I would say it's don't get mad, take care of your own needs. Don't worry what the other person's doing. Many times in my last 2 marriages, I found myself in exactly that situation, which is why a lot of times, like in other relationships, and sometimes even in my current marriage, I seem to be like, I don't need you. I can do this on myself. I got this. You actually have to learn to depend on people after you've been so hurt and abandoned, and it's all on your shoulders to take care of yourself. And in my case, my daughter too. I didn't have a man around. I didn't have anybody to help me, really. So I just learned that the only person I could depend on was me. And when people would disappoint me, I'd just say, okay, fine, it's a disappointment. Let's see what we can do and go from here. Just pick up the pieces and make something out of it. I still do that to an extent. Like if I have something planned and it falls through, I don't sit and wallow and cry and complain. I mean, I might complain. I'm sure I complain, but I don't stay there. It's like, okay, fine, this happened. It's a disappointment. I'm angry about it. I'll get over it, whatever. And probably within like 10 minutes, I'm over it. And I've already found something new to do to occupy my time. It's just how it is. Something breaks down. Well, you've seen it. You've seen like where for instance, my pipes under my sink broke down. I put a bucket under there. I'm like, well, if I can't fix the pipes because everything's all clogged up from the ice or whatever, and it needs to defrost and it's wintertime, so that's not likely to happen anytime soon, then I'll just put a bucket under to catch the water. I'll just detach the whole darn pipe since I'm constantly having to take it apart anyway to fix it, and we just dump the bucket. It's just called being resourceful. And life is going to bring you disappointments at times. You're going to have to just decide, are you going to let it knock you down and keep you down? Or are you going to have a plan B? I'm real good with coming up with plan Bs. A lot of times at work, I'll make a mistake when I'm boxing cookies or whatever. Maybe a cookie will break. Now, a lot of times we can just piece it back together if it's not too broken. But it's not anything to lose sleep over. We just mark it down for less cookies and lower the price. But you see what I mean? It's just something that you have to improvise and be resourceful with. A lot of people did not learn how to do that. Like in childhood, they didn't get disappointed because they were given everything they wanted. And mom and dad took care of everything. And they didn't really have to think for themselves. Then they get out in the real world and a boss yells at them, or they lose a friendship, or somebody breaks up with them, and they don't know how to cope because they're not used to having to cope with things that don't go their way. So it's important. It's kind of like the butterfly. If you try to force it out of the cocoon too soon, it will die. It needs to struggle. It needs to stretch its wings and push its way out, just like the chick and the egg too. Same thing. They have to struggle. You have to struggle sometimes, and you have to learn that it's just a struggle. It will pass, and you'll get through it, and you'll find a new way to cope with it. So That's how I live my life anyway, for what it's worth to you. Myth number 6. When others set boundaries, it injures me. And this is a myth. They're saying this is not true. Randy, I'm sorry, but I can't lend you the money. Pete said, this is just a bad time for me. My best friend Randy thought to himself, I come to him in need, and he refuses me. What a blow. I guess that shows me what kind of friendship we really have. Randy's preparing to embark on a life of boundarylessness with others. Why? Because being on the receiving end was hurtful to him. He even made an emotional vow never to put anyone else through his experience. Many of us are like Randy. Having someone say no to our request for support leaves a bad taste in our mouths. It feels hurtful, rejecting, or cold. It becomes difficult to conceive of setting limits as being helpful or good. Having to accept boundaries of others is certainly not pleasant. None of us enjoys hearing the word no. Let's look at why accepting others' boundaries is such a problem. First, having inappropriate boundaries set on us can injure us, especially in childhood. A parent can hurt a child by not providing the correct amount of emotional connection at the appropriate time. Children's emotional and psychological needs are primarily the responsibility of the parents or the caretaker. The younger the child, the fewer places he or she can go to get those needs met. A self-centered, immature, or dependent parent can hurt a child by saying no at the wrong times. Robert's earliest memories were of being in his crib, alone in the room for hours at a time. His parents would simply leave him there, thinking he was fine if he wasn't crying. Actually, he had moved past crying to infant depression. Their no created a deep sense of being unwanted, which followed him into adulthood. This also creates narcissists, by the way. When a child is neglected to the point where they learn all they can depend on is themselves, they become very narcissistic a lot of times. Second, we project our own injuries onto others. When we feel pain, one response is to disown the bad feeling and throw it onto others. This is called projection. Quite often, people who have been hurt by inappropriate childhood boundaries will throw their fragility onto others. Sensing their own pain in others, they will avoid setting limits on others, as they imagine how devastating it would be to them. And then if it's a narcissist, when they avoid setting limits on the person that they projected onto, then they resent the person for not doing what they want. Robert had extreme difficulty setting nighttime limits with his 3-year-old daughter, Abby. Whenever she would cry about having to go to bed, he would panic inside, thinking, I'm abandoning my daughter. She needs me, and I'm not there for her. Actually, he was a wonderful father who read stories at night, prayed, sang songs with his little girl, but he read his own pain in her tears. Robert's injuries kept him from setting the correct limits on Abby's wish to keep him singing songs and playing until sunrise. I don't think I've ever gone that far with my kids where I did it till sunrise. But yes, I was what they call a suck up. If the kids would cry for a glass of water or I can't sleep, I'm scared. I gave into that every single time. I was a wimp as a mother, very much so, especially when my kids were little. Plus, I didn't really know how to set boundaries, and I didn't like setting boundaries because somebody in my life, I won't get into who it was very, very strict with me and very strict with my children. And I was like, well, when I can make this decision about my children on my own, I'm going to just be totally lax. I'm not going to be so harsh with them. So again, I went to an extreme of just letting everything go that they did versus finding that balance of, okay, honey, it's time for bed now. Mommy will read you 2 more stories and then the light's going out. I did that occasionally. But I was one of those parents, and my kids would tell you this. I was inconsistent in my parenting. So I would go for a few days, letting them stay up as late as they wanted, and then crack the whip and nope, you got to go to bed at this hour. And it sent confusing messages to my kids. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a supportive husband. So I just wasn't the best mother at times. I wasn't very consistent in my discipline. I was consistent in my love, but I think sometimes I gave love when I should have given correction, and I didn't know the difference. So, because to me, correcting equaled abuse and harshness, and I didn't want to do to my kids what was done to me and done to my daughter at times by somebody. Okay. Third, an inability to receive someone's boundary may mean there is an idolatrous relationship. Kathy felt wounded and isolated when her husband wouldn't want to talk at night. His silence resulted in severe feelings of alienation. She began wondering if she were being injured by her husband's boundaries. Been there, done that. The real problem, however, lay in Kathy's dependence on her husband. Her emotional well-being rested on his being there for her at all times. He was to have provided everything that her own alcoholic parents hadn't. When he had a bad day and withdrew, her own day was a disaster. I have a hard time not taking things personally sometimes. When people are angry and they lash out at me, it's not that I look and say, what's wrong with me? I say, how dare they? I just get like ticked off. Like, what is your problem? Leave me alone. I'm not very patient at times. And I know that. Though we certainly need each other, no one but God is indispensable. When a conflict with one significant person can bring us to despair, it's possible we're putting that person on a throne that should only be occupied by God. We should never see one person as the only source of good in the world. It hurts our spiritual and emotional freedom and our development. Ask yourself, if the person I can't hear no from were to die tonight, to whom would I go? It's crucial to develop several deep, significant relationships. This allows those in our lives to feel free to say no to us without guilt because we have somewhere else to go. That's so true. And I don't have a lot of those types of relationships anymore. I have my husband. I have a few people online. I hardly ever see my in-person friends. I haven't even talked to any of them in like a long time. So that gets difficult to not have somewhere to go, I just go to God. He talks to me all the time, but I would like to have like more of an in-person friendship with somebody. Maybe someday. All right. When we have a person we can't take no from, we have in effect handed over the control of our lives to them. All they have to do is threaten withdrawal, and we will comply. This occurs quite often in marriages where one spouse is kept in emotional blackmail by the other's threat to leave. Not only is this no way to live, it doesn't work either. The controller continues withdrawing whenever he or she is displeased, and the boundaryless person continues frantically scrambling to keep him or her happy. Dr. James Dobson's Love Must Be Tough is a classic work on this kind of boundary problem. Fourth, an inability to accept others' boundaries can indicate a problem in taking responsibility. Randy, who needed a loan from his best friend, is an example of this problem. He was making Pete responsible for his own financial woes. Some people become so accustomed to others rescuing them that they begin to believe that their well-being is someone else's problem. They feel let down and unloved when they aren't bailed out. They fail to accept responsibility for their own lives. Paul strongly confronted the Corinthians in a letter that has since been lost. He set limits on their rebelliousness. Thankfully, they responded well. Even if I caused you sorrow by my letter, I do not regret it. Though I did regret it, I see that my letter hurt you, but only for a little while. Yet now I am happy, not because you were made sorry, but because your sorrow led you to repentance. 2 Corinthians 7, 8-9 in the Bible. The Corinthians took, accepted, and responded well to Paul's boundaries, whatever they were. That's a sign of taking responsibility. It's helpful to remember Jesus' golden rule here. In everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. Matthew 7:12. Apply it to setting limits. Do you want others to respect your boundaries? Then you must be willing to respect the boundaries of others. Okay, I'm going to actually stop there, even though I know that is not 5 through 10. It's 5 and 6. But those were long readings there. And as you can hear, my voice is going in and out. I keep having to clear my throat. So I think it's time to rest my voice, lest I don't have any voice at all for work tomorrow. So I will do a part 3 on this video. At any rate, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, like the video, share the video, hit the little bell on the bottom here. Leave me a comment. Let me know what kind of experiences you've had with boundaries. Maybe you are the person that feels slighted when people don't do what you want them to do. Maybe you don't know how to handle that. Maybe you have found out how to handle that. Maybe you're the person that thinks you have to people please everybody and do what the control person in your life makes you do. Let's talk. Give me comments down below I'm always happy to get your comments, and I thank you for commenting, those of you that have. I've gotten so many more comments this week. It's what spurs me on to keep doing what I do, whether it's singing, dancing, exercising, doing my books, whatever. You guys are the reason I'm here. So help me out. Input is important and appreciated. All right. So you guys have a great night, day, whatever it is there. And I will see you on the next boundaries video. I think we are on, let's see, myth number 7. So be looking for that one soon after this one. I'm doing it systematically, uploading as I go. So you guys have a great night. Sounds like it's raining again. I'm going to go and get a good night's sleep shortly so I can work in the morning. Be blessed. Shalom.